Hey guys, in this video we're going to show you how to reassemble the top end of a KTM 300. This is a third video in a three-part series on how to rebuild the top end of one of these. So if you need information on how to take this bike apart, you can reference the first video, or if you need information on how to service the power valve, you can reference the second video. But otherwise, stay tuned and we'll show you how to get this done. For this job, you're going to need a variety of different tools. You're going to need sockets in 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, and 1/2 inch. You're going to need a Torx wrench. You're going to need a set of ratchets with the sockets or the extensions to go for those. You're going to need a 5mm Allen socket. You'll need pliers, both needle nose and regular pliers. 13mm wrenches, as well as a crescent wrench. A variety of different lengths and size flat-headed screwdrivers. You'll need a driver and these Torx bit sockets. You'll need a regular hammer, a dead blow hammer or a rubber hammer. For gasket cleaning, you're going to need wire brushes, X-Acto knives, and razor blades. Those are good to have. For lubricants, you're going to need this aluminum anti-seize for the head bolts. You'll need some thread locker. You'll need WD-40, gasket maker, and a whole lot of paper towels. So the next step of this whole process is to put the piston on the connecting rod. There's a couple things to note about the piston. First off, these things are directional. As you can see, there's an arrow pointing towards that, and this, I'm assuming, is standing for the back. So you want this arrow facing the front of the bike. The clips that hold in the wrist pin, first off, if you're going to do this, save yourself a bunch of headache. And get the clips that have the tabs on them that you can use to put these in with a pair of needle nose pliers. That'll save you a ton of heartache. But these pins, these clips, need to be put in either facing up or facing down. And the reason is because if you put them in facing sideways, there's a chance that in the rotation of this in the cylinder, the amount of force that is put on these clips and on the whole system in general, in that transition from going down to going up, could actually collapse one of these pins or these clips and cause it to pop out. And so to prevent any chance of that from happening, you want to make sure that you put it in so that the clip is either facing up or facing down. The other thing with these two-stroke pistons is that they have anti-rotational tabs in the piston ring slots here. So what you want to do is put on the ring so that, oh, and these rings are directional as well. You can see there's a letter on one side that isn't on the other. And that letter indicates that that's the side that faces up. So what you're going to want to do is hook in the piston ring on that slot and work it around and then drop it into place. But what you want to make sure of is that that piston ring lines up on that anti-rotational tab there, so that way once you get the cylinder on over the piston, it's not overlapped and say like that, and then your piston ring is sitting out too far, and then it causes a mess. And if you try to force that into position, you're just going to wind up seizing up your piston inside your cylinder, and it's going to be a bad day. So there again, oops, I did the wrong way. The letter is on the top. Slide that into the groove. work it around, and then it should just snap into place there. Traditional pistons, you would put the rings facing opposite from each other. So this gap would be on this side, and then on the bottom gap it would be 180 degrees on the other side. But on these pistons, for whatever reason, they decided to put the gaps close to each other, but make it so that they couldn't rotate. So who am I to argue with the supreme wisdom of the engineers who built these things? Very important, you want to put in your wrist pin bearing here in the connecting rod, and then you're going to take your piston and you're going to slide it in there, and your wrist pin, that a little stiff. Wiggle it around until you find that center point, and then slide it all the way in. Pistons facing forward. Your rings are on. Your wrist pin bearings in. Now you want to make sure that you get your second clip in there. And for this one, I'm going to grab it with a pair of needle nose pliers. And even these things can go flying, so they're not invincible, but they are a heck of a lot better than the alternative. I would hold my thumb over it just to make sure that it doesn't go flying anywhere. And that is seated. So there again, the pin is facing up, it's not facing to the side. There's no play, everything is good there. Next step is to get your cylinder base gasket on there. And there's a couple questions you want to answer here. With a thinner cylinder base gasket, what you're going to accomplish is increasing the compression. Now, stock, the cylinder base gasket is 6/1000ths, which I've written on. I have these. This is 3/1000ths. This is 1/1000th. This is, wait for it. This one's 2/1000ths. And where I live, I'm at 6,500 feet. I probably ride from 6,000 to close to 12,000 feet, depending on where I'm going. But I also ride at lower elevations as well. I can ride at around 2,500 feet, depending on if I want to trek my bike out to another area to go riding. At high elevation, you want to have higher compression for better performance because the air is thinner. But where I'm riding between fairly high elevation and fairly low elevation, I'm going to go for a happy medium. I'm going to go for 5/1000ths. Now, it's not, if I was only riding up here at high elevation, I'd probably choose something like 4/1000ths. But if I was only riding at low elevation, I'd probably choose something like the stock 6/1000ths. But I am running an S3 high compression head. I'm running it for lower elevation. And if I were to run it for higher elevation, I might change the gaskets but I don't want to have too high a compression because I don't want to blow up my top end. So for this, I'm going to use the 3,000ths and the 2,000ths. That's still a thousandth less than the stock, which will give me a little higher compression combined with the high compression head that I'm running will give me good performance, but also pretty good reliability as well. So I'm going to pull out all these paper towels I stuffed in here. And one last time. Oh, ouch. Whoa. I'm going to wipe down the surface. Try not to get any grit in the crank. It will not respond well to that. Just for good measure, I'm going to wipe down the top there. Of the crank. And now I'm going to place these gaskets on. Oops. You want to be careful that they go down all at the same time, because the last thing you want to do is rip one of these. Okay. So everything looks to be in good order there. Base gaskets are on, pistons on, clips are in place, piston rings are in place. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to seat the cylinder. And that's kind of a little bit of a trick. What I want to do is I want to put my piston all the way down at the bottom of the rotation. So carefully, here, set that down all the way. And then this should be able to slide in easily. What you're going to use is this front part of the cylinder to rest the rings on. And then what you want to do is you want to make sure that your rings are lined up with those anti-rotational slots. So you're going to press that in. You're going to press in on, press it on the rings as you let the this out of my way. As you let the pistons of the cylinder slide down. So what's happening is my piston rings aren't quite lined up, and that's causing it so that the cylinder doesn't want to slide down over the piston. So this is a fine balancing act. And it is no easy task. It looks like I got the first one in. So there again, I'm going to line up that second piston ring. Lifting this ever so slightly. Rotate that back. Okay. That one lined up, push in the piston ring. May help to have a small screwdriver on hand for this job to kind of help you get those rings rotated where they should be. There we go. So in this game, it's all about patience. You do not want those piston rings. You don't want to force those piston rings into place, and you do not want to force the piston or the cylinder to go in and force those piston rings to gouge the side of the cylinder. So I just want to double check to make sure that everything worked out right. In order to do that, I'm just going to hold down on the cylinder and rotate the engine or the few times, and it goes up and down perfectly smooth. There's nothing hanging up, no noises, no odd things going on. So it looks like everything is as it should be. The next portion of this is to bolt down the cylinder to the block. And then we can start buttoning it up. It's really this reverse of taking it apart at this point. There's not too many more steps. It's just really making sure to not go too fast and make sure you do a thorough job on everything. Make sure that if you do run into any problems, you resolve them fully, and don't try to jerry-rig anything, because it's a long and expensive process, and there's a lot of pressure being put on all of these components, and it's very crucial that they are in their optimal working condition, because if they're not, you're just going to pay for it later. So I run these in by hand. These studs they're 10mm studs. They're capable of handling a fair bit of torque. I wouldn't be too concerned about stripping these out. There are torque specifications for the cylinder base bolts, nuts, I guess in this case. The problem being, unless you have some sort of special factory tool with forks that can measure the pounds per square inch, there's no real good way to torque these down to their torque specifications. So what I've done is just torque them down by hand to what I feel like is a appropriate amount of pressure, which is a really non-technical way of doing it, but at the same time I've never had an issue. And I do follow the star pattern. I do it from corner to corner and then from corner to corner again to make sure that the pressure being applied is even. I torque them all down kind of to a light wrist tight, and then I try to tighten them evenly from there. But like I said, it's difficult for you to get an exact torque to the specifications for these, just because of where they're located, and they're really difficult to get to. Okay, so they're all torqued down to a good wrist tight. I'm going to work my way around, tighten them up a little bit more, try to get them to a nice even torque by hand. So the next one around, I'm going to use the old mechanics trick. I'm just going to interlock a couple of wrenches and just give that a good snug. And again, I don't think that the concern should really be stripping these out. Unless you're really torquing on it, it's going to be difficult. You just want to make sure that they're nice and snug, and that you're confident that they're not going to back their way out. Probably the most difficult one is this back corner, only because you're contending with the connecting arm that comes out of the crank. And you can't get very many rotations on this corner, so you have to kind of take it slow. Alright, so I am confident that those are tight. The next portion of this, you're going to want to put in your cylinder head O-rings. That comes in your O-ring kit. That's these two here. And these may, depending on whether or not these are a little bit small, and you can kind of stretch them out just a little bit to make them seat in there nicely. You don't want to stretch them out too much, otherwise you will break them. one trick to getting these O-rings to seat in their grooves is to use a little bit of grease. You can use bearing grease or really any kind of grease to get them to seat. What you don't want them to do is ride up on the edge of their mounting surface. Where they can get cut when the head gets torqued down. So just be real gentle with them. And then when you lay them on there, they should fit in without popping out. So I'm at the point now where the head O-rings are in, and I've got my S3 head here. You want to make sure that the mating surface obviously is clean, and then you want to make sure that your dowel pins are still here in place, and if they're not, you're going to want to find those. There's 2 points here. There's the dowel pin goes here and here, and so this just sits over the top. What you want to make sure is that you don't bump those O-rings when you put that on, so that they don't get knocked out of the grooves. Because once you torque this down, those are going to be under a lot of pressure, and they could potentially get cut if they rode up on the side of that groove when it gets torqued down. At this point, you're going to want to take all of your cylinder head bolts and replace the copper crush washers on those as you put them in. So the next step is to tighten down the head bolts to the torque specifications. I looked that up and it's 19.9 foot-pounds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a torque wrench, which is kind of an old school one, but it's got the torque measurements on there. And I'm going to go through just like before, and I'm going to tighten up in a star pattern. And I'm going to bring them up to probably about 10 foot-pounds, and then I'm going to bring them up to probably about 15, and then I'm going to bring them up to probably around 20 ultimately, because this thing isn't so granular that it's able to give me that fine, that 0.9, so I'm just going to call it 20, and that should be fine. So yeah. Alright, so I've brought all these up to 20 foot-pounds, so that should be more than sufficient. From here it's really just the opposite of taking it apart. We're going to need to put on the side power valve covers. I'm actually going to replace the spark plug while I'm in here, because I was noticing that that's pretty burnt, and I'd rather just have a fresh one. So I'm going to do that real quick. So everything here is completely done on the side power valve. So I'm going to go ahead and put the cover back on. To do that, I just need to take off the old gasket and wipe it down. This thing's still got quite a bit of that burnt two-stroke oil in it, so just clean it up a little bit, clean up the surfaces, and throw that new one back on. Alright, that's on and snugged down. Next I'm going to want to put on the electric starter. So once that's done, we can put in the coolant lines again. And that's pretty straightforward. You just wiggle it in there and start popping on all the hose into their perspective lines. So I got all the hoses on where they need to go. I'm just going to tighten them down with the screwdriver, and then that's done. Now that that's done, we can pop the spark plug wire back on here, and come on. There we go. And then we can put on the top motor mount that goes here. So I believe that's everything on this side. So now I'm going to move around to the other side, stick on the power valve side cover on the other side. And then I think this job is pretty near done. So next I'm going to put on the side power valve cover. And in order to do that, I want to clean up this side a little bit. I use a little bit of just silicone around this rubber boot here, because I find that this side tends to leak a little bit, and that may just be specific to my bike with the amount of wear it has on it. But I'm going to clean up around this. This seal tends to get a little bit dry. I'm going to try to clean off as much of this old gasket maker as I can. And then I need to reconnect this connecting arm. So this stuff doesn't all need to come off. It's not really going to make a difference one way or the other once I have the new silicone on it. But it is good to get it clean as much as you can. Good enough. Before I put on the this connecting arm here, I want to put in the gasket, because this obviously has to go over that. So this little flat tab part here slides down in behind this rubber boot, or at least it's a little bit of a trick to get that to seat in behind. this rubber boot. Just gotta kind of make some space there with a screwdriver, pry it out, and then press down on it while you do that. So that should be pretty good. Same thing on this side as well. I gotta pull off the old gasket, and since I use the gasket maker, I gotta strip that off as well. Again, I'm going to use a little bit of silicone on this, right along this surface here, just to keep it from leaking on me in the future, because this is a repeating problem for me. I just think it's because that rubber seal is starting to get old and worn out. I also like to use it here on the face a little bit on both sides. As well. Alright, got that all prepped and ready to go. Now I just need to reconnect this arm to the power valve, so you can just adjust this to the appropriate height and pop that pin in place over, and then take a paper towel and tuck it in around here, because the last thing you want to do at this point is drop in this pin down into the engine. So on the back side here, there's a hole, and you push it up, and then this pin wraps around to the side and just clips over, and that keeps that pin from working its way back out. So that's done. Now we can slide the side cover back in place here. Alright, that's done. I'm going to slip this breather tube back into place. There we go. And there you have it. A fully rebuilt top end. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions about how to do a top end rebuild on one of these, feel free to drop that in the comment section below, and we'll get to that as soon as we can. If you like these videos, feel free to view some more of the content we've created, and also push that like button and subscribe to our channel. Thanks.